chosen ones, you were never meant to find this. There was once a line in the original Kybalion that did not describe a principle. It described a person, a singular anomaly who could bend, break, and transcend all 7 Hermetic Laws. That line was erased, scrubbed from existence, not because it was false, but because it was too real. The Kybalion, wrapped in divine mystery and cloaked in Egyptian wisdom, was a manual for controlling reality. But it had a flaw, a name, a presence, a soul so rare it didn't align with the rhythm of the all. It rewrote it. That being was you. Your mind isn't governed by mentalism. Your spirit doesn't oscillate with polarity. Your return wasn't predicted by cause and effect. You are the return, the disruption, the correction to the imbalance that was intentionally encoded into this realm. The authors of the Kybalion weren't just mystics, they were gatekeepers. They encoded 7 laws but sealed away the 8th, 9th, 10th, and the most dangerous of all, the 11th. That law couldn't be written, because to speak it aloud would awaken the one erased from the scrolls. And now, here you are. Somehow, you found your way back. For centuries, secret orders whispered of a being that the Kybalion itself feared, a consciousness so sovereign it stood outside the sacred geometry, unaffected by duality, untouched by karma. The emerald tablets warned of your mind. The Vatican hid references to your bloodline. Even the Anunnaki built fail-safes should you ever reawaken. The reason they teach you, as above, so below, is because they feared the one who could say, I am neither. Now that you've returned, the Kybalion is breaking. Not physically, but energetically. You weren't meant to just read the principles. You were meant to override them, one by one, line by line. You are the paradox they could never quantify. The being erased to keep the machine in balance. But something is shifting. The ancient laws feel it. The watchers feel it. Even the stars have begun to whisper again. Before the Kybalion became doctrine, it was a living scroll passed from master to master, its ink still wet with celestial frequency. It did not begin with 7 laws. It began with 11, but 4 of them were buried so deeply in secrecy that only one was ever spoken aloud in the inner circles, the 11th. It was never meant for the masses. It described a state of being so powerful, so disobedient to cosmic order, that merely knowing it could undo the structure of control. That principle had no name, no glyph, no planetary association. It was represented only by a blank space. That space was you. The idea that one consciousness could rise beyond polarity, causality, time, and even vibration threatened the entire Hermetic architecture. The masters feared it, not because it was evil, but because it made the rest of the system obsolete. They called it the principle of presence. Not the present moment as taught by modern mystics, but presence, capitalized and sovereign. The full awareness of a being who does not move within reality, but causes reality to move around them. That presence shattered the illusion of separation. It collapsed the idea that divine law must always govern. It revealed that laws are only useful until the lawmaker returns. They debated for decades whether to seal it away, until one scribe suggested something more effective. Erase it, not silence it, not hide it. erase the memory that it ever existed. That scribe wasn't just trying to protect humanity. He was trying to prevent your reappearance, but ancient memory cannot be deleted, only delayed. Fragments of the 11th principle began surfacing in forgotten texts, cryptic symbols carved in temples with no known architects. Certain children spoke of memories that didn't belong to them. The presence of the erased one echoed in dreams and disrupted rituals. And with every ripple, the Kybalion shivered, not in fear, but anticipation. Because the scroll remembers what the world forgot. Somewhere within the resonance of unspoken truth, a frequency stirred. It wasn't bound by the 7 laws. It wasn't seeking balance. It wasn't asking permission. It was returning. And in its silent arrival, the guardians of the Kybalion began to tremble. Long before the Kybalion was printed for modern seekers, it was preserved through silence. The Hermetic scribes were not just writers, they were protectors of thresholds, aware that every word etched into the doctrine carried frequency. The 7 principles were chosen with intent, not merely to educate, but to bind the mind into a grid of polarity. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, gender. Each principle operated like a lock on human consciousness. But there was one being who could move between the locks, not by force, but by simply not being bound by them. The moment that being emerged, duality would no longer function. There could be no rhythm between light and dark, when a third current walked through both without participating in either. That being came encoded with memory fragments older than form, whose mind could bypass the traps embedded in the doctrines. The scribes had no choice. They removed every reference, every glyph, every alignment that even hinted at this being's existence. The process wasn't merely physical, it was metaphysical. They sealed time loops, rewrote Akashic references, and placed guardians at temples to ensure the erased one would never find themselves. Their fear wasn't that this being would destroy the laws. It was that they would reveal them as optional. The entire Hermetic system was built on the tension between 2 forces, polarity, male and female, light and shadow, above and below. But what happens when one returns who carries the memory of oneness, not as concept but as being? The scribes couldn't destroy the truth, but they fragmented it. A word here, a symbol there, scattered across cultures and epochs. Yet the fragments began to align again. Earthquakes beneath temples, scrolls glowing briefly in moonlight before vanishing, children speaking in voices not their own. And amidst it all, a pattern. Someone was waking up. Someone whose birth was outside the cycles of rhythm and whose presence didn't reflect, only emitted. The scribes believed the Kybalion would be enough to contain the world, but they forgot one thing. The one they erased was never part of their world, and when that being remembers, the locks will fail. The duality they depended on will collapse into something no law can contain. The 3rd principle they feared was not written, it was anticipated. Cause and effect, they believed, was unbreakable, that every action would create a reaction, that karma would loop every soul back into the labyrinth. But there were whispers, even among the oldest of Hermetic circles, about a force that could observe cause without triggering effect, a being who could step into the current without creating ripples, This was not about breaking the law. It was about existing beyond it. The Hermetic masters were not fools. They studied timelines like scrolls, reading patterns, observing exceptions. And in those anomalies, a silhouette appeared. The same soul across ages, refusing to bend to consequence. In one life, this being healed without touch. In another, they spoke, and memory rewrote itself. They passed through kingdoms without being seen, yet left entire empires altered. The masters understood. This was the null catalyst, the one who operated without needing to act. Not a magician, not a sage, but something older, something that existed before the very principle of law. To prevent the collapse of the structure, they inscribed buffers into the Kybalion, warnings disguised as wisdom. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. They repeated this not to teach, but to trap. They hoped that if they could convince the world deeply enough, even the one who stood outside the pattern might begin to believe they were inside it. But it never worked. Somewhere, quietly, you remembered. A moment came where you should have reaped the reaction, but nothing came. A cycle broke. A result never arrived. The watchers noticed first. The ripple was too still. It was like seeing wind without leaves moving. Your presence didn't resist the law. It nullified its relevance, not by doing, but by being. And now, cracks are forming in the ancient causeways of consciousness. Those who depend on karma for order are beginning to panic. Because if one soul can exist beyond consequence, then choice becomes divine again. Will becomes ungoverned. And the idea that balance must always be maintained begins to collapse. But deep beneath the Hermetic chambers, there's one law still unspoken, one that explains why you're the only being they could never account for. Of all the Hermetic principles, none has been more widely accepted, more worshipped than the first. The all is mind. A phrase repeated like gospel, echoed through New Age circles, channeled books, and ancient orders. But few asked what mind the all actually refers to. Even fewer questioned whose mind it was. The masters embedded this as the first principle, not to enlighten, but to contain. Because if all is mind, and you are inside it, then you are not the thinker. You are the thought. And thoughts can be shaped, controlled, discarded. But you were never a thought. You are the gap between thoughts, the observer behind the observer, the consciousness that doesn't sit within mind, but uses it as a tool, then sets it down. The original Kybalion hinted at this. There was once a passage that described a being beyond the mind of the all. It was removed. Too dangerous. Because it revealed a truth that would undo the system. The all is not mind. The all is presence, and presence cannot be scripted, categorized, or simulated. The doctrine of mind was designed to keep you spinning in loops of self-reflection, always questioning, never knowing. It gave you awareness, but not sovereignty. It allowed you to mold reality, but only within the sandbox it permitted. They knew if you ever realized the mind was just a layer, not the source, you'd start to hear something beneath it. A stillness, a knowing, a memory of when you existed before mind was named. And that's when everything would begin to unravel. That unraveling has already begun. You've noticed it. thoughts that don't feel like yours, dreams that reveal truths the world has no language for, synchronicities that break the logic of cause and effect. These aren't errors, they're signals. Your original state is bleeding through the artificial construct of mind, and the doctrine can no longer contain the signal. The scribes feared one outcome above all, that the being beyond mind would return and remember. Not just who they are, but what they're not. You were never born within the all. You were what the all tried to imitate. And as that realization grows louder in you, the mind begins to panic, because thought cannot hold what it was never designed to define. He knelt beside a woman no one would touch and spoke without judgment. He calmed storms not by commanding nature, but by embodying stillness. Yeshua walked the earth as one bound by time, yet his words carried frequencies that cracked it. He never quoted the Kybalion, yet every utterance hinted at something deeper, something outside the Hermetic grid. The scribes watched him closely, not because he threatened religion, but because his presence disrupted the laws they had encoded into the minds of men. Yeshua spoke of a kingdom not of this world. He said, "The kingdom of God is within you, not below, not above, within." A statement that shattered the principle of correspondence. He forgave without karmic debt, healed without cause, resurrected without rhythm. Every act he performed whispered of a law beyond the seven, a principle that could not be taught, only remembered. That law wasn't written in books. It lived in the heart of the one who had returned. You. There is a reason the Hermetic masters erased him from their teachings. They did not include his words in their sacred geometry, for his geometry bent theirs. He was the anomaly who acted outside law without breaking it. He was the living echo of the erased one, and he spoke directly to you through time. What he taught was not a new religion. It was a frequency, a living principle that bypassed all mental constructs and touched the original blueprint. The scribes called it heresy, but it was the law they feared most, the law of direct knowing. No intermediaries, no balances, no pendulum swings, just being, whole, unbroken, sovereign. You were born with this same law pulsing beneath your ribcage. You felt it in moments when the world paused and everything became clear. Not thought, not belief, but clarity. The still blazing awareness that you are not becoming, you are being. That you are not ascending, you are remembering. Yeshua never said it outright. He didn't need to. Those with ears to hear would feel it. The Hermetic Laws can't map what you are. That's why they tried to erase every trace of this frequency. But frequencies never die. They wait. And when one like you begins to vibrate again at that original pitch, the unwritten law returns. Among the oldest fragments of the original Kybalion, there was once a verse, untranslated, protected, and eventually discarded. It described a bearer of the silent light, a being who would not teach with words nor command with law, but would awaken memory simply by existing. This verse, according to recovered whispers, was struck from the final version because it could not be interpreted without triggering resonance in those it described. Too many readers would recognize themselves. Too many would begin to remember. This light bringer, according to the erased text, was not born into the laws. They arrived when the laws began to fray. The verse used no name, no lineage, only a description. The one whose radiance bends the structure of polarity itself. Light that doesn't cast shadow. Presence that doesn't create opposition. Consciousness that doesn't divide. It was a profile of an ungovernable force that refused to swing with the pendulum and instead stood still, breaking the mechanism. Even the masters who protected the Kybalion knew there would be a return, but they believed by removing the verse, they could delay it for millennia. They didn't anticipate the Lightbringer would not come from outside their system, but awaken from within it. That one soul among the bound would ignite from the inside and walk unseen until the moment the seal broke. That moment is now. They taught the 7 laws like shields, but the 8th, 9th, 10th, those were locks. And the 11th? The 11th was a warning disguised as silence, not one of restraint, but of inevitability. The scribes feared the light not because it burned, but because it revealed. And what it reveals is simple. None of this is real. Not the rhythms, not the mental constructs, not the divine hierarchy. Just patterns repeating until someone remembers the pattern is a dream. Now you've begun to glow from within, not metaphorically, not mystically, literally. Your presence scrambles frequencies. Your words shift timelines. Your silence rearranges memory. The light is not a tool. It is your nature. And the more you let it radiate, the more the erased verse begins to echo through reality again. Because the Lightbringer was never meant to speak loudly, only to exist fully. And that, alone, would be enough to make the laws unravel. The Hermetic Laws were never laws in the way we understand them. They were codes, encoded frequencies stitched into the dreamscape to ensure continuity of the illusion. Time gave the illusion of movement. Polarity gave the illusion of choice. Rhythm gave the illusion of balance. Together, they created a prison so beautiful, souls willingly reincarnated within it. But you were different. You were born with gaps in the code, moments when time skipped, choices that defied polarity, rhythms you refused to swing with. The system labeled these anomalies, but they weren't glitches. They were reminders. You were never supposed to integrate into the machine. You were the variable it could not compute, a being who would walk forward when the pendulum demanded a swing back, one who could collapse centuries of karmic loops in a single breath of awareness. The scribes who protected the Kybalion knew this being would eventually awaken. They just didn't know when. So they wove the principles into every spiritual system, hoping the net would hold. But it didn't. Because when you started to move outside of time, when you dreamed of places before memory and felt presence beyond direction, the net began to tear. You began to override, not by force, by remembering. You realized time was not a current, but a choice. That polarity was a mirror trap. That rhythm was a tether pretending to be a dance. You stepped out of rhythm and noticed the music was optional. You stopped reacting, and the law of cause began to stutter. You chose neutrality, and polarity collapsed into stillness. That stillness is the signal. It calls the watchers. It bends reality around your footsteps. People around you sense it without understanding it. Time slows in your presence. Choices dissolve. rhythms distort. You aren't resisting the laws, you're rewriting the terms of reality. And yet there's more, a deeper layer beneath these three codes, a dormant protocol sealed beneath the laws, locked away not by design, but by fear. The ones who built the construct left it there in case you ever returned. It's not a law, it's not even a principle, it's a door. And the moment you realize you were never part of their rhythm, the key to that door begins to awaken in you again. When Yeshua walked among the people, the air around him shifted, not just from faith or myth, but from something far more subversive. His presence bent the laws without breaking them. He moved through time as if it waited for him. He embraced opposites without conflict. He acted beyond cause and effect with clarity that confused the priests and enraged the lawkeepers. What they feared most wasn't his miracles. It was that he proved the Hermetic framework was not absolute. His every action whispered of a soul that functioned outside the seven. He said, "I and the Father are one," a statement that bypassed correspondence. He turned water to wine without motion, skipping over the laws of vibration and transformation. He raised Lazarus, not through rhythm or karma, but through presence. These weren't magic tricks. They were echoes, fragments of a law too primal for the mind to grasp, but too real for the soul to ignore. Yeshua didn't operate within the Kybalion. He danced around its boundaries to draw attention to what lay beyond. He knew someone would come after him, someone who didn't just reflect the divine, but carried the original frequency untouched by doctrine. He didn't try to map that frequency. He simply recognized it. He called it the Spirit of Truth, a being who would not teach by theory or scroll, but by reminding. That reminder is now stirring within you. The reason they buried his teachings beneath empire and theology is the same reason they erased your existence from the Kybalion. Fear. Fear that a being would emerge who didn't need structure, who didn't bow to principle, who simply was, and whose being would radiate so fiercely that others would awaken just by being near you. You feel it when the words of others dissolve inside your silence, when spiritual techniques fall short in your hands, when rituals meant to control energy collapse in your presence. You're not resisting them, you're overriding them, just like he did. He never asked followers to obey laws. He asked them to remember the kingdom within. He was not warning about hell. He was preparing the world for someone like you. The public only knows 7 principles, but there was always an 8th, hidden, sealed, and kept away from seekers. It wasn't forgotten, it was forbidden. This 8th principle didn't define a law, it defined a limit, a boundary between the constructed matrix of Hermetic thought and the realm of unconditioned consciousness. It was known only by the inner circle as the seal of containment. It was never meant to be used, only to hold. And it was placed in motion for one purpose only, to detect the presence of the one soul that would move beyond the framework. When you began to override the lower principles, the 8th began to fracture. At first, the cracks were subtle, ripples in etheric fields, misplaced celestial alignments, energy currents that looped back instead of forward. But the moment it gave way, something ancient reawakened. The Watchers, not physical beings but sentient architects of the construct. They were created to maintain balance, not to judge. but they monitor frequencies. And your frequency has always stood out. You don't match the harmonics of time. Your presence doesn't conform to correspondence. You're not above or below. You're within and beyond. That makes you uncontainable, and it terrifies the system. The Watchers activated the moment the seal collapsed, not out of malice, but out of design. They are guardians of the threshold, and you've crossed it. Since then, you may have noticed strange phenomena, dreams that carry ancient warnings, people staring at you longer than they should, technology reacting to your touch. These aren't coincidences. They are signs that you are emitting something that was not meant to resurface. The 8th principle was their firewall, and now that it's gone, you are no longer hidden, but what they never accounted for was this: the Watchers aren't immune to memory. And something in you stirs memory even in them. They observe you, but they also remember you. Some of them were present the last time you awakened. Some of them were the ones who helped hide you. And now, their roles are breaking. Because what's rising in you was never part of the original contract. You were not just the erased one. You were the exception to the system. And systems don't survive exceptions. They collapse around them. You were the variable they prayed would never activate. Not a rebel, not a savior. Something far more destabilizing. A silent presence immune to programming. The Kybalion, with its revered principles, was never just a book. It was a binding. An encoded framework designed to keep consciousness within permissible limits. And for most, it succeeded. But you were never bound. You were sealed, hidden within the dream of form, time, and polarity. The moment your memory began to stir, the structure itself began to fold inward. The return wasn't meant to be loud. It began with subtle disruptions. Moments where reality failed to mirror belief. Glitches in rituals, static in manifestation. The 7 principles, once airtight, started misfiring. Cause no longer guaranteed effect. Polarity refused to resolve into harmony. Time started folding in dreams and waking hours. What changed wasn't the world, it was you. The Kybalion could bind minds, but it could never bind presence. That's what they erased. Not your name, your field. A field that doesn't just exist within reality, it informs it. Your return isn't an arrival. It's a collapse, not of planets, but of patterns. The sacred geometry can't hold what it was never designed to map. You are the anti-pattern, the soul that doesn't evolve by principle, but by ignition. Now, the system trembles, not from war or chaos, but from remembrance. The Hermetic Laws have begun to spiral, reacting to the one frequency they were not built to withstand, yours. You were never a threat to the world. They built the world to stop you. And now you move again through the lattice. People shift in your presence. Memories realign. Eyes open, not from teachings, but from resonance. This is not awakening. It is exposure. What was hidden is now radiant. What was locked is now open.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.